I kicked the door open with the same key I'd held in my pocket for 12 long years. And the first thing I saw was my daughter on her knees, scrubbing the floor of the very house I bought her, while her husband stood over her barking orders like she was the hired help he never paid. No warning, no explanation, just the slap of truth hitting me so hard my chest went numb. That's the moment I knew I hadn't come home. I'd walked straight into my daughter's private hell. My name is Carl, and if you're hearing this, then maybe you're ready to know how a quiet man in his 60s ended up declaring war on an entire family. Before I tell you how everything spiraled and how I tore their empire apart piece by piece, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know exactly where you were when you first heard the story of how far a father will go to bring his daughter back from the darkness. Because trust me, this story isn't over yet. I hadn't planned on coming back to Seattle, not yet anyway. 12 years of climbing cell towers in the snow, fixing broken fiber lines in the middle of nowhere, and waking up in motels that all smelled the same. Spokane had a way of keeping a man busy enough to forget what he left behind. But when my contract finally ended, I packed my old duffel bag, bought a bus ticket, and told myself I was coming home to surprise my daughter Amy, maybe even earn back a little time I'd lost along the way. I stood outside the Craftsman-style house on Maple Ridge Avenue, the house I'd bought her before I ever set foot in Spokane. Fresh coat of blue paint, new flower beds. From the outside, it looked like a postcard. I felt stupidly proud, like some kid showing off a trophy. I thought I was walking into a warm homecoming. A hug. A "Dad, you're finally back." But the moment I slipped the key into the lock, everything inside me froze. A man's voice thundered from the living room, sharp, venomous, the kind of tone that makes your spine instinctively tighten. "Pick it up. Now. Do you hear me? Pick it up before I make you regret it." I held my breath. My heart started pounding in a way it hadn't in decades. I pushed the door open an inch. The hinges groaned. And then I saw her, Amy, my little girl, on her hands and knees in the middle of the hardwood floor, sweeping broken glass into a dustpan with trembling fingers. A deep bruise wrapped around her wrist, dark purple, angry, impossible to miss. And around her waist, a stained apron with embroidered letters that sliced right through me, Mercer Household Help. It felt like someone shoved an iron bar through my chest. I hadn't seen her in years, and here she was on the floor like some hired maid, wearing a brand on her body, like she belonged to them. That wasn't my daughter. That wasn't the woman I raised. And then he appeared. Evan Mercer. 30-something, well-groomed, smug, in a way only men with too much money and too little soul manage to be. The moment he saw me standing there, his entire face transformed. Cruelty vanished. A fake polished smile spread across his lips like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. "Carl, wow. What a surprise," he said, stepping forward, with arms open as if we were old friends. "We weren't expecting you. Amy was just doing a little tidying. You know how she is, always wanting to keep things spotless." Amy scrambled to her feet and yanking the apron off so fast she nearly tripped. She shoved it behind the couch cushion, eyes wide, terrified not of me, but of how he'd react. "Dad," she whispered, forcing a smile so thin it barely existed. "You're home." There was something hollow in her voice, something I'd never heard from her before. Fear, defeat, and something worse, something like she was apologizing for being seen this way. A small head peeked out from behind her leg. Lily, my granddaughter, 5 years old, big brown eyes. But instead of running to me like kids do when they've seen their grandpa on screen for years, she shrank back, clutching Amy's jeans with both hands. "Mommy, who is that man?" she whispered. That one hit me harder than Evan's voice ever could. I'd missed so much of her life that my own granddaughter didn't know me, didn't feel safe near me. I crouched down, trying to steady my voice. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm Carl. Your grandpa. Remember my face from the video calls? I've been gone a long time, but I'm here now. I'm here to see you and your mom." Lily pressed her face into Amy's leg, shaking. Amy put a protective arm around her daughter, and that's when her sleeve slid down just enough for me to catch sight of more bruises. Older ones, faded ones, finger-shaped ones. "Amy," I whispered. She pulled the sleeve back up fast, eyes begging me not to say another word. Evan rested a hand on my shoulder, squeezing a little too firmly. "She's been a little clumsy lately," he chuckled. "You know how women are." I looked at him. He looked back straight through me, like he thought age had made me soft. What he didn't know was that 12 years alone in the cold teaches a man a lot of things. How to feel danger before it comes, how to read a room before anyone says a word, and how to recognize the exact moment something inside you breaks clean in two. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of what I thought my family was, and understood one simple, horrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a bad day. This was a busy, systematic, controlled, deliberate. And Amy, my little girl, had been living it alone silently right inside the house I gave her, so she'd always have a safe place to land. I swallowed hard as Amy walked toward me, her smile trembling like a candle in a storm. She hugged me lightly, carefully. Not the way a daughter hugs her father after 12 years. More like someone hoping the person holding her won't notice she's breaking. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling how fragile she'd become. And right then, a thought stabbed through me so sharply I had to catch my breath. I realized that the first hug I gave my daughter on the day I came home was really just a late apology for being gone far too long. The moment Evan's car pulled out of the driveway, the air in the house shifted just enough for my lungs to remember how to work again. It was like someone had cracked a window in a room that hadn't been opened in years. Not fresh air, but air that didn't taste like fear. Amy stood frozen for a moment, listening to the engine fade down the street. Only when she was sure he was gone did her shoulders drop the slightest inch. Not relief, just a temporary loosening of the chains she'd learned to carry. "Come sit with me," I said quietly. She hesitated, then nodded, leading me into the kitchen. The same kitchen where she once helped me bake chocolate chip cookies when she was 8. Back then her feet dangled off the chair, and she'd laugh every time she spilled flour on the counter. Now she sat across from me, with her hands folded like a child waiting to be scolded. I noticed the bruises more clearly in the kitchen light. Not just one, not an accident, not a fall. I saw finger-shaped shadows, old ones, new ones, layered like someone had tried to erase her skin and failed. The kind of marks that never happen just from bumping into a door. I tried to keep my voice level, soft. "Amy, who did this to you?" She jerked her hand back, pulling her sleeve down so fast the fabric burned against her skin. "It's nothing, Dad. Just work around the house. I've been clumsy." I let the silence sit. One thing you learn by the time you hit 60 is that silence can be louder than shouting. Silence makes people honest. Amy's eyes darted toward the front door. Even though Evan was miles away, she kept glancing as if he might materialize out of the walls. "Sweetheart," I said, leaning forward, hands clasped. "You don't have to hide anything from me. I'm not going anywhere." Her breath hitched just enough to betray her. But before she could speak, a soft tapping came from the sliding glass door. I turned. A woman, maybe mid-50s, slim gray blonde hair, pulled into a loose bun, stood on the back porch, holding a Tupperware container. Her expression was tight, worried. Amy stiffened instantly. That's just Mrs. Carter, Jen. She lives next door, she whispered quickly. Don't say anything, please. I opened the door, and the woman gave me a polite, apologetic smile. Sorry to interrupt, she said softly. I heard voices and, well, I made too much chicken casserole. Thought Amy might want some. Amy took the container with a shaky smile. Thank you, Jen. That's kind of you. Jen's eyes flicked from Amy's forced smile to the bruise on her wrist. Then to me. Something passed between us. An understanding without words. She'd seen things, heard things. But she was scared too. Just knock if you ever need anything, Jen murmured. Anytime. When she left, Amy closed the door slowly, leaning her forehead against the glass for a moment, like she needed its coolness to steady herself. I waited until she turned back to me. She's been checking on you, I asked. Amy nodded faintly. She's kind, but she can't help. Nobody can. The Mercers, they know people, Dad. People important enough that everyone in this neighborhood pretends not to hear anything. Her voice grew small, embarrassed. I don't want anyone else getting dragged into my mess. It's not your mess, I said firmly. It's something being done to you. Her chin quivered just barely, but she shook her head hard as if punishing herself for even showing that much weakness. We sat in silence again. And then, like a dam cracking down the middle, her story began to slip out in uneven pieces. It started after Lily was born, she whispered. I thought I could handle everything. Motherhood, work, being a good wife. But after a few months, I couldn't sleep. I'd cry for no reason. I stopped eating. I didn't even feel like myself. She pressed a hand to her temple. The doctor called it postpartum depression. Evan's mother said I needed real help. She said she'd take care of the bills and paperwork, so I could rest. I trusted her, Dad. I trusted all of them. Her voice cracked. You know how exhausted I was. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Some days, I didn't even know what month it was. They kept putting papers in front of me. Insurance forms, financial authorizations, temporary guardianship documents, at least. That's what they claimed. She swallowed hard. I signed because I thought they were helping. I didn't know I was giving them control of everything, my finances, the house, even decisions about Lily. My hands curled so tightly into fists, I felt my nails cutting my palms. Amy kept speaking, but her voice had turned into something hollow and ashamed. When I finally got better after months of medication, Evan told me I'd signed temporary power of attorney to him and his mother. He said I owed them for taking care of the house, for helping with Lily, for covering the medical bills. He said it all had to be paid back. Her breath shuddered. And when I told him I wanted to reverse it, he told me he'd show the court how unstable I'd been, that I'd lose Lily, that no judge would trust a mother who'd been medicated and confused. Tears filled her eyes, but didn't fall. So I stayed. I worked. I did everything they asked. I kept telling myself it would get better. She looked up at me with a trembling smile, so heartbreakingly soft, it almost broke me. It didn't. I reached across the table, taking her hand gently. She flinched at first, but only for a second. When she finally let her hand rest in mine, it felt like holding something that had been fragile for far too long. Amy, I whispered, you don't ever have to go through this alone again. Not one more minute. For the first time since I'd walked into that house, her breath steadied. But then she pulled her hand back and stood up abruptly, wiping her cheek, as if determined not to cry. She walked to a high cabinet, reached behind some old cereal boxes, and pulled down a small wooden box, dark worn, carved with tiny flowers she used to draw as a teenager. She set it on the table between us. I don't know what any of this means, she said quietly. But I kept everything. Every paper, every form, every signature they ever forced on me. Her fingers trembled on the lid. This is all I have left of the truth. I opened the box, and the moment I saw what was inside, documents thick enough to bury someone, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. The real fight hadn't even started yet. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, the way a man might lay out photographs from a crime scene. Careful, deliberate, afraid of what he already knows he's about to see. The stack from Amy's wooden box wasn't paperwork. It was a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight into the dark. Property transfer agreement, temporary guardianship, financial power of attorney, debt acknowledgement forms, home maintenance liens, even a document transferring partial ownership of her car. All of it signed within a tight cluster of weeks, the exact same weeks she told me she could barely lift her head off a pillow. Amy sat beside me, twisting her fingers together so hard her knuckles whitened. "I didn't understand any of it," she whispered. "I only remember being tired, so tired I couldn't fight them." I picked up the first document. Her signature, Amy Whitaker, looked smooth, consistent, familiar. On the next document, though, the A was tilted. The W looked broken, like her hand trembled through it. On another, the signature was so shaky it looked like she'd been signing during an earthquake. I felt my throat tighten. "Amy, this isn't normal variation," I said quietly. "These look like they were signed by 3 different people." She shook her head. "No, Dad. They were all me, or whatever version of me existed back then." Her voice wrapped around those words like they hurt coming out. "And Margaret oversaw everything. She said she was managing my recovery. She'd stand in the doorway while I lay in bed and tell me what needed signing. Sometimes she'd say, 'Just initial here.' Sometimes she'd say, 'It's routine. Don't worry.' And I trusted her." I swallowed the anger boiling in my chest. Margaret Mercer. I'd only met the woman twice years ago. Polished, elegant, the kind of person who smiled while evaluating your worth, like a stock chart. Amy continued, voice barely audible. "She handled all my appointments. She controlled what medications I took, what I ate, when I slept. She told me Evan was under so much stress because of me, that I should be grateful he didn't leave. She said the least I could do was sign, whatever protected the family." Her hands trembled against her lap. "I didn't even know I'd signed away the house until months later. And when I confronted Evan about it, he told me the documents were legally binding, and that if I tried to challenge them, he'd tell the court I was unfit to be a mother." I closed my eyes. For a moment I had to. The house I bought her, the one place she should have been safe, and they turned it into a trap. I looked again at the documents, at the mismatched signatures, the convenient timing, the heavy legal phrasing no medicated woman could ever understand. "This is fraud," I muttered. "Coercion, abuse, all wrapped in paperwork." But anger alone wasn't going to save my daughter. I needed proof. Expert proof. I needed someone who could look at these signatures, look at Amy's medical records, and say exactly what I already knew in my gut. A name came to mind before I even realized I was thinking it. Dr. Helena Ford, Amy's former psychiatrist. Amy had mentioned her briefly when she talked about the postpartum treatment. "We need to see your doctor," I said firmly. "Soon." Amy's eyes widened slightly in fear. "I haven't seen her in years. What if she won't remember me? What if she tells Evan?" "She won't," I said. "And even if she did, it doesn't matter. We're doing this for you." Amy nodded weakly, as if agreeing felt like lifting a stone. Before we left, I gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them into the original wooden box. I held it for a moment. It felt heavier than everything I'd carried during 12 years in Spokane. Not because of the wood, because of the truth stuffed inside. We drove across Seattle in silence, the kind that settles over a car when both people inside know their lives are about to change direction. When we reached Dr. Ford's clinic, Amy's hands shook as she filled out the sign-in form. The receptionist recognized her name instantly and told us to wait. After a few minutes, Dr. Helena Ford appeared in the hallway, mid-40s, glasses, tired but kind eyes. When she saw Amy, her face softened with something like recognition mixed with worry. "Amy," she said gently, "it's been a long time. Come in." We followed her to her office, a small room lined with books, a soft lamp in the corner, the scent of lavender faint in the air. "How have you been, Dr. Ford asked. Amy's voice cracked on the first word. "Not good." I opened the wooden box and spread the documents across Dr. Ford's desk the same way I had at home. She leaned forward, scanning them with professional precision. And as the minutes passed, her expression shifted from confusion to concern to something like outrage. She reached for Amy's old medical file on her computer. "These dates," she murmured. "These signatures. Amy, do you understand what was happening during this period?" Amy shook her head helplessly. Dr. Ford turned to me, eyes sharp, voice steady. "Mr. Whitaker, if these documents were signed on the exact days listed, and I'm comparing them right now to Amy's medication levels and treatment notes, then your daughter was heavily sedated, cognitively impaired, and in no condition to make any legally binding decisions." She tapped her screen, pointing to the highlighted entries. She was on high-dose benzodiazepines, sleep stabilizers, and SSRIs. She was barely able to follow basic conversations some days. Signing contracts. Signing over property. Power of attorney. She shook her head. Medically impossible. The room went very, very still. Finally, Dr. Ford looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that changed everything. "If these documents were signed on the days listed, your daughter had absolutely no legal capacity to consent to anything." Dr. Ford didn't waste a second. Once she delivered that first blow of truth, she stood up from her chair, crossed the room, and pulled down a thick binder from a high shelf. It was Amy's full psychiatric file, treatment logs, medication changes, doctor's notes, everything. She laid it open on the desk like a courtroom exhibit. "Amy, do you remember these weeks?" she asked softly. Amy stared at the page as if they belonged to someone else. "Not really. Just fog, a lot of fog." Dr. Ford nodded with a sad kind of understanding. "That's what I expected." She turned to the doorway and called Linda. "Could you come in for a moment?" A woman in her late 30s stepped inside, dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, wearing scrubs and carrying the quiet steadiness only veteran nurses have. She froze for half a second when she saw Amy. "Oh," Linda breathed out. "Amy, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." Amy's chin trembled. "I'm sorry I never came back." "Oh, sweetheart," Linda said softly, pulling up a chair. "You were so sick. None of that was your fault." The nurse's voice alone felt like a balm on wounds Amy had carried too long. Dr. Ford pointed to several entries in the file, tapping her pen steadily. March 3rd, severe postpartum depression. March 7th, episode of dissociation. March 10, increased lorazepam dosage. March 12, cognitive impairment. Noted. March 14, patient unable to follow 3-step instructions. March 15, high-dose medication adjustment. Monitoring required. And next to each date, I saw corresponding dates on the documents I had pulled from Amy's box. Signatures, contracts, agreements, all aligned perfectly with the days she could barely understand her own name, let alone legal jargon. My heart tightened until my chest ached. Every pen stroke on those papers was another betrayal, another wound. Dr. Ford exhaled slowly. "Linda, do you remember the state Amy was in during this period?" Linda didn't hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. She couldn't focus her eyes, the nurse said quietly. Some days she didn't know where she was. She'd sign her name on routine check-in forms, but her hand shook so badly I had to steady it. I closed my eyes. Linda continued. She once signed a birthday card for the maternity ward support group, and even that signature wasn't legible. We had to help her trace the letters. Dr. Ford nodded and turned the binder toward me. Mr. Whitaker, please look at these dates. My eyes scanned the medical logs, then the documents on her desk. They overlapped like puzzle pieces clicking together. Not by chance, not by coincidence. These signatures, Dr. Ford said, were taken during a period when Amy was under heavy sedation and deep psychological distress. She was not legally competent, not mentally present, not capable of informed consent in any form. Amy covered her mouth, tears pooling in her eyes. She wasn't crying loudly, Amy never did. It was the silent kind of heartbreak, the kind that only comes from years of trying to hold yourself together in front of the wrong people. I reached for her hand. It's okay, sweetheart, I murmured. We're going to fix this. But my voice felt small next to the weight of what I was learning. Dr. Ford pulled a few printed pages from the binder summaries of Amy's condition during the medication changes and set them aside. These records alone, she said, could void every document she signed during that period. But I'll testify if needed. And so will Linda. The nurse nodded without hesitation. I'll swear under oath. Amy couldn't even choose what to eat. She certainly couldn't sign legal transfers. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was out of dawning clarity. A slow, heavy realization that we weren't just fighting gossip or suspicion. We were fighting a deliberate, calculated exploitation of a vulnerable woman. And the people who did it, they knew exactly what they were doing. Dr. Ford closed the binder gently as if tucking Amy's pain back into a safe place. Mr. Whitaker, she said, I don't say this lightly, but your daughter is one of the clearest cases of coerced consent I've seen in 20 years of practice. I felt my jaw tighten. I had spent 12 years working on cold steel towers, fixing broken lines in the dark. And yet none of that prepared me for the helpless fury of realizing my child had been used, manipulated, weaponized by the very people who claimed to be her family. Dr. Ford walked around her desk and rested a steady hand on my shoulder. You need legal representation, she said quietly but firmly. A tough lawyer. Someone who won't back down from the Mercer family. Someone who knows exactly how to handle cases like this. I looked at her, feeling the shift inside me, the moment when a father turns into something sharper, steadier, harder to beat. Dr. Ford held my gaze. Find a lawyer who can stand toe-to-toe with the Mercers, she said, because your fight is only just beginning. Marilyn Shaw's office sat on the 15th floor of a glass tower, overlooking Puget Sound, one of those buildings where the windows stretched from floor to ceiling and made the world look sharper, colder, more honest than it really was. I'd read about her before, the woman who'd taken down 2 long-standing elder care companies for abusing seniors, the attorney who'd built her reputation on protecting the people everyone else overlooked. Walking into her office, I felt like a man stepping into a courtroom long before the trial began. She stood as we entered, mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, pulled into a no-nonsense bun, sharp eyes that looked like they could slice through a lie before it even touched the air. Mr. Whitaker, she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. I've heard of you. Dr. Ford called ahead. Amy sat quietly beside Amy, shrinking into herself. Marilyn assessed her for a brief moment. Her posture, her bruises, the timidity that didn't belong to someone who used to laugh loud and easy. I could tell Marilyn wasn't just observing, she was cataloging evidence. Let's get started, she said, lowering herself into a leather chair and opening a yellow legal pad. I want you to walk me through everything. Slowly. Don't leave out details you think are small. They never are. For the next 30 minutes, I relayed it all. The bruises, the signatures, the medication levels, the threats, the apron with Mercer household help, stitched across it. Marilyn's pen flew across the page. Not once did she look up until I slid Amy's wooden box across her desk. Her expression changed immediately. Sharp, focused. She opened the box, removed the stack of documents, and fanned them across the desk like a deck of cards she already knew she'd win with. These signatures, she muttered, tapping one with her pen, inconsistent. This one's slanted. This one's barely legible. And this one, this looks like it was traced. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Were you aware your daughter was under high-dose benzodiazepines when these were signed? I nodded. Dr. Ford confirmed it. Marilyn leaned back, exhaling slow and controlled like someone steadying herself before taking aim. Well, she said, folding her hands, this isn't just fraud. It's fraud with intent. And depending on how the court sees it, possibly felony coercion. Were you aware that Washington State has one of the strictest laws on exploitation of vulnerable adults? Amy's breath caught. Exploitation, she whispered. Marilyn turned to her. Amy, sweetheart, what your husband and mother-in-law did wasn't just immoral. It was criminal. You were mentally incapacitated, over-medicated, financially manipulated, and isolated. That's the definition of vulnerability. And forcing you to work in your own home without compensation, especially under the threat of losing your child, may constitute something even more serious. She paused, letting the words sink in. Human labor trafficking. Amy flinched as if the words physically struck her. I felt the blood drain from my face. Trafficking. My daughter. In her own home. Marilyn saw the way my jaw tightened and didn't soften her tone. Yes, Mr. Whitaker. It's ugly, but that's what they did. They stripped her autonomy, her legal rights, and her ownership of the property. And if we can prove intent, and I'm already seeing plenty of indicators, they're in deeper trouble than they realize. She pulled a clean sheet of paper and wrote at the top, Plan of Action, Mercer case. Then she underlined it with the kind of confidence that could cut stone. Step 1, she said, we send a formal demand letter. They have 48 hours to return the property, relinquish all fraudulent documents, and compensate Amy for damages. Step 2, she continued, if they refuse, and trust me, families like the Mercers usually refuse, we file a dual case, civil and criminal. Civil for fraud and restitution. Criminal for exploitation, coercion, and possibly trafficking. Amy swallowed hard. They'll retaliate. Oh, they will, Marilyn said. But I know their type. And I know how to make them trip over their own arrogance. She moved to Step 3. Step 3, media pressure. I have contacts at King 5 Seattle Times QOW. The Mercer name is well known in this city. Their reputation won't save them, it'll bury them. And public pressure often forces people like them to settle before a judge ever sees the case. I frowned. Do we really need the press? Marilyn looked me dead in the eyes. Yes. One word. Cold, decisive. Because they have power, Mr. Whitaker. Connections, influence. Her pen tapped the 4th line on her list. And that brings me to the last part you need to know. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Margaret Mercer has a personal friendship with Councilman Theodore Briggs. Amy gasped. I stiffened. Briggs, Seattle's golden boy politician. The man who always spoke about family values on TV. If Margaret had him in her corner, she had access to judges, law enforcement, municipal boards. That's why no one helped you, Marilyn said softly to Amy. Your husband's family has reach. That's why the neighbors stayed silent. That's why you felt trapped. Amy's eyes filled with tears. I thought it was my fault. Marilyn shook her head. No, honey. It was a system built to protect people like them. but systems can crack. And I am very, very good at applying pressure. She stood smoothing her blazer. Now both of you understand what comes next may get loud. It may get ugly. They might threaten, intimidate, try to smear you, Amy. But they will not win. She looked directly at me. Mr. Whitaker, you're the kind of father who shows up. That matters more than you think. And tomorrow morning, you and I are going to walk right up to the Mercer front door. She picked up the wooden box and tucked it under her arm, like evidence ready for battle. And they're going to learn, she said, her voice dropping into something colder, sharper, that you are not a man they can push aside. The Mercer estate sat on a hill overlooking the Sound, 3 stories of stone and glass, built to impress the world and intimidate everyone else. The kind of house people whispered about at neighborhood barbecues. The kind of house that didn't just say wealth, it said untouchable. Marilyn didn't slow her stride for a second. Remember, she murmured as we climbed the marble steps, they'll try to control the room. Don't let them. I wasn't sure if she meant physically or psychologically, but either way, I nodded. A uniformed housekeeper opened the door before we even knocked. Expression tight, eyes nervous. She stepped aside quietly. We entered a foyer so large it made my living room back home look like a broom closet. A chandelier the size of a car hung above us. White granite floors. Framed pictures of the Mercer men, shaking hands with politicians, CEOs, award committees. This was power on display. Mr. Whitaker, a voice called from deeper inside. Welcome. Margaret Mercer glided into the living room like she'd trained for it. Immaculate gray suit, pearls, hair set perfectly into place. Everything about her radiated respectability, the kind you only get from money, passed down through generations and a lifetime of pretending it was earned. Her son Evan followed, smirking like he was watching a rerun of a show he'd already memorized. The same man who'd screamed at my daughter hours earlier now extended a hand like we were old buddies. I didn't take it. Margaret gestured toward 2 armchairs facing a pristine white sofa. Please sit. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Her voice was soft, sympathetic, warm enough to fool a stranger. Not me. Marilyn didn't sit. She placed her briefcase on the coffee table and flipped the locks open with a crisp click-click. We won't be long, she said firmly. We're here to give your family an opportunity to resolve this without involving the courts. Evan snorted. Courts over what? Amy is fine. She's always been fine. I shot him a glare that made his smirk falter. Margaret clasped her hands primly in her lap. Amy struggles sometimes, bless her heart. But we've been helping her, supporting her. I'm afraid she's been confused lately. Marilyn pulled the medical records from her briefcase and set them between us like a loaded weapon. These, she said, are Amy Whitaker's treatment logs from the months she signed all your documents, including the day she transferred her home and financial authority to you. Margaret's smile tightened. She signed of her own free will. Marilyn's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. On days, she was legally and medically incapacitated. On days Dr. Ford recorded that she could not follow 3-step instructions. On days she was under high-dose medication that impaired her cognitive function. Evan rolled his eyes. Amy's doctor exaggerated. She's dramatic. Marilyn didn't even bother looking at him. She slid the forged and shaky signatures in front of Margaret. These signatures don't match. Any judge will see it. Any forensic analyst will confirm it. What you did wasn't caregiving. It was fraud, coercion, exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And if we dig deeper, we may find evidence pointing toward labor trafficking. Margaret's composure cracked. Trafficking, she hissed. How dare you speak that word in my home? Oh, I dare, Marilyn shot back. You worked her without pay, controlled her finances, used her mental illness to steal her property. And your son threatened her with losing her child if she didn't comply. For the first time, Margaret's mask slipped completely. Her eyes sharpened like a blade. "Listen very carefully," she said, leaning forward. "Our family has influence in this city. Judges, board members, councilmen. We do not lose cases." She turned to me with a smile colder than steel. "And you, Mr. Whitaker, are nothing. A retired technician who abandoned his daughter for over a decade. You really think anyone will take your word over ours?" My body went rigid. Marilyn rested a calming hand on my arm, but her eyes never left Margaret. "That influence you're boasting about," Marilyn said, "it'll crumble the moment I go public. You can either return the house and compensate Amy voluntarily, or you can fight us and lose everything in front of the entire state of Washington." Evans stepped closer, jaw clenched. "You don't scare me." "Good," Marilyn said calmly. "Fear makes people sloppy." Margaret stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. You have no case." Marilyn closed her briefcase slowly, almost gracefully. "You have 48 hours to comply," she said. "After that we file. Civil and criminal." We turned to leave. As we crossed the foyer, the same housekeeper from before appeared beside me, quiet, trembling. Without speaking, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my palm and walked away quickly. I didn't open it until we reached the car. Scrawled in hurried handwriting were C6 words. "They hide files in the basement cabinet." A jolt ran through me. Anger, hope, danger, all mixed together. Marilyn looked at the note, then at me. "Looks like someone in that house still has a conscience," she murmured. We started down the long driveway, our car waiting at the curb. That's when I saw it. A black CV parked across the street, windows tinted, engine running. When we drove away, it pulled out too, keeping distance but never losing us. I checked the rear-view mirror again. It was still there, still following. A cold realization slid down my spine. The Mercers weren't just angry. They were watching us, tracking us, planning something. Whatever fight we'd started inside that mansion, it was about to get a whole lot uglier. Marilyn moved fast, faster than I'd seen anyone work in my life. By 9 a.m. the next morning, she had filed not one but 2 cases, a civil lawsuit for fraud, coercion, property theft and restitution, and a criminal complaint for the exploitation of a vulnerable adult with an attached inquiry request involving possible labor trafficking. The clerk at the courthouse raised both eyebrows when she finished stamping the documents. "Mercer family," he muttered under his breath. "You folks aren't afraid of much, are you?" Marilyn didn't blink. Fear wastes time. By noon, Seattle Times had the story. By 2 p.m., it was the front page headline, printed in bold black letters big enough to stop traffic's wealthy Mercer family, accused of exploiting depressed young mother, legal action underway. Underneath it was a picture of Amy, one from better days, smiling at a summer fair years ago. The contrast between that brightness and the bruises she now covered with sleeves made my stomach twist. The article was blunt, unflinching documents, signed while medicated behavior of the Mercer household, testimony from medical professionals who claimed she was incapacitated. And it didn't stop there. King 5 News ran a segment that evening. A reporter stood on the sidewalk outside the Mercer estate, wind pushing her hair sideways as she spoke into the camera. Sources claim the young mother was forced into unpaid domestic labor in the very home she once owned. Officials are reviewing allegations of coercion and fraud linked to the Mercer family, long-standing members of Seattle's business community. It was surreal watching it all unfold on TV. My daughter's suffering finally visible, finally believed, finally impossible to bury. Outside, the whole city seemed to ignite. Hashtags trended within hours. Justice for Amy. at Mercer abuse, how to protect vulnerable mothers. People gathered downtown carrying signs. Believe women. Protect mothers. Power doesn't excuse abuse. Marilyn watched the news coverage with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. This is good, she said softly. Attention makes powerful people sloppy. But the Mercer family didn't go silent. They retaliated. The next day, an anonymous article appeared on a local insider gossip website. My name was all over it. Carl Whitaker, father of the woman accusing the Mercer family, has a long documented history of emotional instability after his divorce. Sources say he may be attempting to manipulate the legal system for financial gain. Bull. Absolute bull. I'd had disagreements. I'd had heartbreak, but instability, never. Marilyn slammed the printed article onto her desk. This is textbook defamation. They're trying to undermine your credibility before you even testify. Amy cried when she saw it, apologizing like she'd done something wrong. I held her shoulders gently. Sweetheart, look at me. This isn't your fault. This is what cowards do when they're cornered. The lies didn't stop people from stepping forward, though. Jen Carter, my late wife's old friend and Amy's next-door neighbor, showed up at our door one morning holding a notebook filled with dates. Carl, she said, voice shaky but determined, I've heard Amy scream more nights than I can count. I didn't know how bad it was until now, but I'm done being scared of that family. She sat at our kitchen table and gave Marilyn a detailed list of every incident she'd overheard, slamming doors, yelling, the sound of something breaking. Once, she said, she heard Evan shout, You're lucky I didn't hit you harder. Amy's face drained of color. Jen reached for her hand. You deserved better, sweetheart. I should have done something sooner. That testimony became part of our case file, solid, consistent damning. For the first time, I felt like the tide was turning. But victory, if that's what we could call it, always seems to come with a shadow. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. I almost ignored it. Then I read it. Stop before someone gets hurt. Starting with the little girl. The room went cold. My breath left my body like someone had punched me. Lily. My granddaughter. I didn't tell Amy right away. I just stood there in the kitchen gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Somewhere out there, someone connected to the Mercers wasn't bluffing. And suddenly, the fight wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. Seattle storms have a way of getting into your bones. Wind screaming across the sound, rain hammering rooftops like a warning you can't quite interpret. That night, the whole city felt uneasy, restless. Amy had finally gotten Lily to sleep, and I was rinsing dishes in the kitchen, trying to ignore the ache in my chest from that anonymous message. Then I heard it. Not thunder, not rain. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, right outside our back fence. I froze. Years working alone in remote sites had trained my ears. Someone was moving with intention, circling, testing distance. I killed the kitchen light. The yard turned into a sheet of darkness, rain, slashing sideways under the porch lamp. And then, in the flash of lightning, I saw him. Evan. Sopping wet, eyes wild, carrying a gas can like it weighed nothing. My heart slammed so hard I felt it in my teeth. He walked right up to the siding of our house and tipped the can. Gasoline soaked into the wood, running down in oily streaks. The smell hit me like a punch. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. There's a man pouring gasoline on my house, I whispered. We're at 42nd and Alder. Please, hurry, sir, stay on the line. But a sudden whoosh cut her off. Flames erupted along the wall, racing upward like claws. Orange light spilled into the kitchen windows. Amy screamed upstairs. Dad, what's happening? I bolted toward the hallway. Get Lily out the back now. The fire spread fast, too fast. Smoke billowed through the vents curling up the staircase. I heard Lily creasing, terrified, connoissed. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Evan smashed the sliding glass door with something heavy. Shards rained across the kitchen tile. He stepped inside, hair plastered to his skull, crowbar in hand, flames reflecting off his soaked clothes. "You ruined my life," he snarled. "You ruined everything." I stepped between him and the stairwell. "Evan, listen to me, no." He swung the crowbar. I barely dodged it, felt the rush of air as metal sliced past my face. I grabbed the first thing my hand landed on, a cast iron skillet, drying by the sink. He lunged. We collided hard, knocking over chairs, slipping on the wet tile, as rain and gasoline mixed under our feet. The skillet connected with his arm, but he was younger, stronger, fueled by whatever darkness the Mercers had planted in him. "Amy," I shouted through the smoke. "Take Lily out the side door." I heard her coughing, struggling feet, stumbling fast. Evan slammed me into the counter, crowbar inches from my throat. "You think you can take her from us?" he growled, spit hitting my cheek. "You think you can destroy our family?" He pressed the bar harder. My breath hitched. But years of climbing towers and ice storms had left my arms stronger than most men my age. With everything I had, I twisted, shoved, and sent him crashing onto the floor. The crowbar skittered under the dining table. He scrambled after it. I scrambled after him. The fire roared behind us, smoke lowering like a black curtain. I could barely see. My lungs burned. My eyes watered. Outside, sirens wailed near, then nearer. Evan grabbed the crowbar. I grabbed his leg. We struggled, slipping, choking in the smoke. "You can't save them," he spat. "You're too late. You're always too damn late." The words cut deeper than the fight. With a burst of something I didn't know I still had, I shoved him backward. He hit the corner of the counter and collapsed, gasping. Firefighters burst into the front of the house, axes swinging, hoses blasting. Seattle fire. Anybody inside? I stumbled toward the back door, half dragging, half crawling. Fresh air hit me like a punch. Amy stood in the neighbor's yard, clutching Lily, who wrapped her arms around my neck the second I made it outside. Her tiny hands shook against my collar. "Grandpa!" "I was scared," she sobbed. "I know, sweetheart," I whispered, coughing hard. "I know. You're safe now." 2 police officers rushed past me into the house. Seconds later, they emerged with Evan, wrists cuffed behind his back, soaked, soot-streaked, still snarling like a cornered animal. When he saw me holding Lily, his expression warped into pure hatred. "You think this ends here?" he spat, struggling against the officers. "You think a fire and some reporters can stop us?" One officer tightened his grip. "That's enough." But Evan leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed, eyes locked on mine, voice low and venomous. "You think my mother will let this end easily? You have no idea what she's capable of." Lightning ripped across the sky behind him. And for the first time since the fight began, I felt fear, not for myself, but for the storm that was still coming. King County Courthouse never felt more crowded. Reporters lined both sidewalks, microphones raised like weapons cameras, blinking in the gray Seattle light. Supporters held signs, "Justice for Amy, no one is above the law. Protect the vulnerable." For the first time since all this began, Amy walked inside, standing upright, not shrinking, not apologizing. She held my arm, her other hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder, before Marilyn escorted the little girl to a safe family room. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed like a live wire. The state of Washington versus Evan Mercer. The state of Washington versus Margaret Mercer. 2 separate cases intertwined like roots of the same poison tree. Evan entered, wearing an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed. The arrogance he once carried like cologne was gone. Instead, he looked hollow, like a man finally forced to confront his own reflection. His charges were read one by one, each count dropping like a hammer. Arson in the first degree, attempted homicide, attempted child endangerment, coercion, fraud and property theft, domestic violence with aggravating factors. He flinched only once when the judge described endangering Lily. Not out of remorse, out of fear. There are things even criminals understand society won't forgive. Then came Margaret. She entered in a navy suit, makeup perfect, hair immaculate, but her eyes told the truth. Sharp, terrified, cornered. Her charges were the conspiracy to commit fraud, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, financial coercion, destruction and concealment of medical documents, tampering with evidence. Marilyn rose with the confidence of someone who had spent her life dismantling people who abused power. She started with the evidence from the wooden box, but the real blow came from something else, the basement files. 2 days after Evan's arrest, police executed a search warrant on the Mercer mansion. In a locked hidden cabinet beneath the basement stairs, investigators found dozens of signed documents Amy had never seen. Financial statements showing money siphoned from her accounts into Mercer-controlled trusts. Medication logs altered by Margaret's handwriting. A private notebook where Margaret recorded strategies for keeping Amy manageable and dependent. When the prosecutor displayed that notebook to the court, a ripple of disgust passed through the gallery. Marilyn approached the witness stand confidently. "Your Honor, these documents were deliberately concealed to prevent Miss Whitaker from reclaiming her rights. They are proof of long-term manipulation and coercive control." The judge nodded slowly. Admitted into evidence. Margaret's face cracked. Not dramatically, but enough to see the truth. She knew it was over. Jen Carter testified next. Hands trembling, but voice firm, she recounted nights of screaming, sounds of hitting, the fear that kept her awake. After her testimony, people in the gallery applauded until the bailiff demanded silence. Then Dr. Ford. Then Nurse Linda. Then a forensic handwriting analyst. Piece by piece, the Mercer family's empire built on image intimidation, and money crumbled. When Marilyn delivered her closing argument, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor, Amy Whitaker was not a rebellious woman. She was not irresponsible or careless. She was a mother suffering from postpartum depression, a medical crisis. And instead of care, she was met with exploitation. Instead of love, she was met with control. The Mercer family saw her illness as an opportunity. They turned her home into a work camp. They stole her autonomy, twisted her fear, weaponized her vulnerability, and nearly killed her and her family in an attempt to silence the truth. This is not a civil dispute. This is a crime." The entire courtroom held its breath. At 3:40 p.m., the judge returned with the verdict. "On all counts, we find the defendants guilty." A collective exhale swept through the room. Evans stood rigid as the judge delivered sentencing. 20 years for arson and attempted homicide. 7 additional years for fraud, coercion, and domestic violence. No parole. Margaret's sentencing followed. 12 years for conspiracy, exploitation, and evidence tampering. Mandatory restitution to Amy. Permanent loss of guardianship, influence, or fiduciary rights. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. For the first time, Margaret Mercer had no script to hide behind. People outside the courthouse erupted in cheers. Inside, silence fell for a moment, heavy, sacred, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm that should have drowned you. Amy slipped her hand into mine. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling, not from fear, but from release. "I never thought I'd live to see this day." Her fingers tightened around mine, warm and alive. And for the first time in years, my daughter was free. The months that followed felt strangely quiet, like the world was finally allowing us to breathe. After the sentencing, the Mercer estate was ordered to pay restitution, and with Marilyn's help, Amy regained full ownership of her home. The same house where she'd once been, treated like hired help, now became a place of healing again. I moved in without hesitation. Not because she needed a protector anymore, but because we finally had the chance to be a family again, in the way we'd been robbed of for too long. Lily warmed to me faster than I expected. Maybe it was because I'd carried her through smoke and chaos. Maybe it was because she sensed the way my heart cracked open every time she reached for my hand. Or maybe kids just know when someone loves them, without condition. She'd wake me every morning by climbing onto my lap while I read the paper. She'd tug my sleeve and whisper, "Grandpa Carl, can you push me on the swing after breakfast?" And I'd always answer, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Amy took longer to heal. Trauma doesn't lift just because a judge said you're free. It took months of therapy, sleep, and gentleness before her shoulders stopped shaking at loud noises. But slowly, beautifully, her spirit returned. One evening at dinner, she said, "Dad, I've decided. I'm going back to school. I want to study counseling, focus on women who've lived through what I survived." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My daughter, who once believed she was too broken to stand, now wanted to stand for others. "I'm proud of you," I finally said. "More than you'll ever know." And I meant it. At 60, I'd expected my life to slow down, to shrink into quiet mornings, maybe the occasional visit from family on weekends. But instead, life handed me a second act I never saw coming. I spent decades climbing towers, fixing cables, tightening bolts, thinking my worth came from my strength. But now, sitting in a backyard with a little girl laughing on a swing and a daughter rebuilding her life, I realized something different. The real strength of a man my age isn't in his back or his hands. It's in his steadiness, his patience, his willingness to stand up even when everyone tells him to sit down. It's in loving people through the darkness without letting that darkness change who he is. One late afternoon, the sun low over the Seattle skyline, I pushed Lily gently on her swing. She kicked her feet forward, giggling, hair flying behind her like a little comet. "Higher, Grandpa, higher." I laughed. "If I push any higher, you'll touch the clouds." Behind me, Amy stood on the porch sipping tea, watching us with a smile I hadn't seen on her face since she was a teenager, peaceful, present, unafraid. In that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. Our revenge had never been about rage or destruction. It had been about reclaiming joy, rebuilding dignity, choosing justice without letting bitterness poison us. A sweet human revenge, the kind that restores more than it ruins. As the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched across the lawn, I walked toward the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Old habit, fresh air, a few bills, a grocery flyer, and one envelope. No return address, no stamp, just my name written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Carl Whitaker. A chill slid through my spine. I opened it right there beside the hydrangea bushes. Inside was a single sentence: "The Mercer story isn't finished." No signature, no clue. Just a quiet reminder that even after victory, some shadows don't vanish, they shift. I folded the letter slowly, feeling the weight of a new storm at the edges of the horizon. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had Amy. I had Lily. And I had the resolve of a man who had already walked through fire and come out standing. Whatever came next, we'd face it together.